Okay, I put some posters together to give you an idea. This one's the published map of Pikes Peak. It's kind of crowded, which is why I did this one, but what you can see are the main valleys. These are on the southwest side.
Where did we come in at?
We came up from the peak. We came up from Glynco, which is, this is the road.
Okay.
So we are actually just off of the map up here.
All right, okay.
We haven't ascended yet.
Yes, okay.
We'll go on up and stop at one spot, and then we'll stop at Glynco before we go on up.
Okay.
But this one, and the contours are tight, so it makes it busy. But what I want you to see out of this is the northeast side. The contours are very busy. This is very steep. And the southwest side is more gentle with these long valleys. The northeast side has the short, steep cirques, and then they grade out into longer valleys. So in general, and what's kind of accepted is that there's 7 main glaciers glacial valleys on Pikes Peak, starting with Glynco, North French Creek. If any of you have been back there, that's Oil Creek Tunnel is right at the base of the cirque on North French Creek. South French Creek, which is better known as Bottomless Pit. And then what's that called? The crater.
Okay.
And you can see this is labeled the crater, and then that actually came out here. Now, what's really strange on the southwest side, you'll notice that these valleys are much longer with distinct moraines at the end of them. This is West Beaver Creek, East Beaver Creek, and Bomer.
Here, I'll tell you what, why don't I hold this?
And then, yeah, except I got to look around to see it.
Well, you want to come down here?
Yeah, I could do that too, I guess. Okay. And then this is the Lake Moraine. Quite often, or at least in the article I found published, they include Bomer and this as one glacier. I'm not sure that's true. This is downhill.
Yes.
So from here,
yes,
the moraine is here,
yes,
and then the other one is Bomer, which is on the southeast side, and the 7 lakes where if you go up to and have to stop, it's gated on the up from Clyde, little park in that area. That ends right here at this where these lakes are, which is the moraine. Now, what's kind of interesting on almost all of these moraines, if you look, they're pretty distinct. Especially on this side, they're very indistinct on the northeast side, but they almost all terminate at about 10,000 feet. Both sides of the mountain. The one big exception is this one. This one terminates. This lake is 11,000 feet, and that's basically where the moraine is. And this one is almost down to 10,000.
Is there a second one below that 11,000 foot one?
Yeah, both these lakes are about the same. They actually sit on the moraine, but the elevation of the lake is 11,000.
Are they lakes or reservoirs?
Yes, they were lakes, but they are now. They have a lot of modifications, so they've been enlarged so that they're what you see now are actually reservoirs. The same with these.
Yeah.
This is bison.
I knew that one.
This one.
Yeah.
And these. What's interesting about this one? This is the lake that breached in the 1965 flood. And I'm hoping we'll have time to go around, and it's worth driving around to see it if you haven't, to Gillette, and see, number one, see that moraine, but number two, see where that moraine was breached and what that looks like. Just a little bit of rain topped up that thing and just took everything right out from there down to Pueblo, I think.
Where is that?
So is the glacier still existing there?
No, there are no glaciers on the peak right now.
No glacier. Okay.
They've been gone for 10,000 years or more. But what we're looking at are the valleys and the remnants that were created by the glaciation.
That glacier comes out at Gillette, which is where you turn to go to
Right.
Cripple Creek.
Right.
Where is Gillette on the
Well,
map?
well, Gillette Flat is right here.
Okay.
That road should be there.
I always thought there was some kind of mining operation going on up there, all those
Well,
rocks.
subsequent to that breach, they've put in a gravel processing plant on there. So yeah, it's sort of mining, but that basic breach
But all those rocks up there is just the moraine coming down.
were a result of that breached
Cool. Okay.
moraine. Okay, now just
65 was the
'cause
year
I-
of the Denver flood, right? 65.
65 was the big Denver flood.
Right,
Yep.
yeah, so this is the same,
Yeah,
Rain.
that rain event
yeah,
occurred basically over Monument Hill,
yeah,
so that Plum Creek flooded the Denver side of it.
yeah.
Monument Creek and this part of Pikes
didn't know
Peak
that.
got that same storm.
I didn't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, this one I hand traced just the 200-foot index contours because I thought it would show the topography a little bit better than this. This one shows the moraines a little better and shows that they go down to about 10,000 feet. This one shows the individual valleys, Glynco, North French, South French, Crater, and then Lake Moraine and Bomer. Bomer is easy to see with that. But what I also want, you can sort of see there's a broad plateau up here. And so what I did was then I took this map and I laid a sheet over it and I tried to imagine, well, what did this look like before there were any glaciers, before the glaciers cut anything. And that's how I came up with this, with the summit still as a high point, a very steep northeast flank, and a very gentle southwest flank. And what you can imagine, these two are volcanic knobs that you see over at Cripple Creek, Trachyte and Cow Mountain. And because the volcanism was 22 million years ago, those probably existed at the time when the glaciation was initiated. When glaciation was initiated, and Cal Ruhlman would say 400,000 years ago, Pikes Peak was a Monadnock that stuck up above what was otherwise a pretty.
Monadnock?
It's a mountain that remains on a peneplain or an area that's been leveled. Okay.
Thank you for asking.
Well, that's somewhat important, and ultimately I'll show you some other things. That it was very subdued. It was very gentle topography on the mountain. There must have been some kind of rivulets started on the mountain that I just can't tell exactly where they were. You can imagine, but at any rate,
What are the pictures on that?
you don't see anything real dominant up here, but you can sort of see these. This one is where the Glynco Glacier would have started, headed. This is where the North French, this is where the South French, this is where South French, and this is where the crater would have started. What I also think, and what people see today, is there's a big gap in the ridge that goes from the summit of Pikes Peak to, it's not quite on this map, but the summit of Madre would be out here. And there's this big valley that cuts it. I think that was a continuous ridge until glaciation started. And that the Lake Moraine Glacier, actually by headward erosion, ate its way through that ridge, and now there's a very distinct saddle that goes down. This is up at 13,000 feet generally on El Madre and the shoulder of Pike, but the top of that ridge above these lakes is about 11.5, 11.6. So there's like 1,500 feet of topography that's down there. That looks, we can see some of those in the photographs too.
So there's multiple periods of glaciation that produce this. Right?
Yeah, in general, and Cal, there's some that are previous, but he seems to think that the weather changed and that the major events of glaciation started about 400,000 years ago with what would be called, in terms of continental glaciation, the Kansan. And that was one of the most extensive. And then there were 3 other major events. If anybody's familiar with, I don't know what the second one is, but then the other...
Kansas, Nebraska, Illinois, and
Wisconsin. Okay, so then the Nebraskan and Wisconsin are broken up in terms of mountain geology. Those were continental sheets. None of them extended so far south as to be this far south. But because the mountains were elevated, there was undoubtedly periods of glaciation occurred during those. The last 2, the Nebraskan and the Wisconsin, would be called Bull Lake is the older one, and Pinedale is the younger one. So in terms of terminology and the moraines we'll look at today, we'll look at Bull Lake and Pinedale. But I think this is the setup when it started. Cal's idea was that during the Kansan, or the first glacial period, that probably the whole mountain was covered and ice extended down all around the mountain to about 10,000 feet. As you started developing these different valleys, then they got bigger. The flanks and the shoulders would hold less ice. Most of the snow and ice would be blown and built up in the valleys. In the valleys, the end of ice would still come down to about 10,000 feet. And that's what we see. On the southeast side, there's no evidence of Bull Lake moraines, which basically says they were overrun by the younger Pinedale moraines. But you can logically think that the Bull Lake still extended as far down to about that 10,000 foot.
What about the Pleistocene? What happened? The very last thing that would have happened?
Well, that is the Pleistocene.
Oh, okay.
And I mean, Cal would pick nits, and he would say that the first 3 are Pleistocene, and the Pinedale would be Holocene. But yeah, basically those 4 events are the Pleistocene continental glacial events.
Okay. So like
And that's-
10,000 years ago, the most recent?
Well, for the Pinedales, about 10 to 15,000 years ago. For the Bull Lake, it's about 100,000 years ago.
Okay.
The peak. Actually, the peak on the Pinedale, I think, would be closer to 25, and then it was gone by 10,000 years ago. And the same with Bull Lake. It goes back as far as 130, I think, and then probably was gone by 100,000. Okay, then I have some photos. What we're going to do is go and see some of the moraines, and there's an article I read by Huber and Gaber and that they describe and differentiate the moraines. I want to show you that ain't easy. Now they did also more testing of glacial materials, how thick the weathering was, and things like that may have helped them immensely. That's not anything that, without a lot of practice and experience, that you can tell in the field. So what you and I are going to be able to see are the gross aspects, and you'll look at one place and say, well, this is obvious, the type of material that would be Pinedale, and this is obvious that this is the type of material that would have been Bull Lake by their morphology. And then you go to the next place and they're just the opposite. They look just the opposite, and somehow they were that way. At any rate, let me flip these over. We'll start here with Glynco, and as the road goes up, I'm going to propose we stop at Glynco, but then when we go above Glynco, we'll drive right under this moraine, which is the Pinedale moraine. And then I'm going to suggest we stop. There's, I think, enough of a lane right along here that we can pull out 3 cars, and then we can look at the material in this area in particular.
Are these stream beds? Are these stream beds?
No, this is a road. This was a road they built into the bottom of the circuit at Glynco so that they could take aggregate to use to build up the road. Okay, and then when we stop at Glynco, and I propose we stop there both for lunch, but we can walk on the lower part of the moraine, and that'll be the Bull Lake moraine. And then this face is actually looking in at this. This is standing at the top of the moraine, looking down into this hole. That's where they cut the, dug the aggregate out. But that shows the bottom. It's right at the base of this very steep cliff at the head of the moraine. This shows how hummocky and how smooth, which is not the typical description you would have of the Pinedale. Pinedale is usually described as being more angular, more rocks exposed at the surface, less gravel and soil development. Those are kind of hinged to the older Bull Lake. But then here again, this is looking down over the top of the Pinedale moraine and then into the Bull Lake moraine below. This is farther down back in the woods, and this is Bull Lake. But again, there's a lot of rocks, but they are pretty rounded. This, yeah, I'm not sure we're going to get to the summit without a lot of hassle. She wouldn't give me a ticket to the summit, and I assume she didn't give them to you either.
No, she said we had to ride the shuttle.
Yeah, so what we might do is all get together and take up to the shuttle. She also told me the shuttle driver wouldn't stop, and she wouldn't let me stop at the coal between Devil's Playground and the summit.
I thought we were told that the shuttle might not be running.
Yeah, it wasn't supposed to be.
No, it wasn't supposed
One
to
thing
be.
I'll ask is how many people can hike up. There's an exposure, but you got to hike up about 100 yards or 200 yards above Devil's Playground. And what I want to show you now is this relationship where the glaciers on the northeast side of the mountain are very steep head walls, and then cirques down below. And the glaciers on the west side are very gentle with very subtle or non-existent cirques, catchment basins, if you will, for the right there and there. But from the coal on North French Creek over into East Beaver, you stand right there and you look at both of them. I mean, it's beautiful. If you've ever been on a peak, you can just sit there and see that thing go out of sight, and this one just sort of gently drapes off. You can see that on the West Beaver Creek and Glen Cove, but we have to walk up on away from the parking lot a little bit. If everybody thinks they can do that, we can do that and won't have to go any farther up. The other thing, and the reason I would have gone to the summit is so we could go over the edge and look at this. This is the crater, and this should be the same age and the same morphology as this cirque in Glen Cove. But notice how rough and bouldery this moraine is compared to how smooth this one is. They're still both identified as being Pinedale. So
Why such a difference? Why such a difference?
I don't know. I'm accepting Huber and Glauber's designations because they did much more than me, which was just look at the morphology of the rock units. They did a lot with the surface and the chemistry and stuff like that. So they have a lot more data and a lot more reasons to identify them as such.
Maybe the deposits have been reworked in one case as opposed to the other.
Well, these have been reworked here because they've been dug out, but
I mean, naturally.
oh, naturally,
Yes.
yeah. And that's the difference is, much of the Pinedale Moreno material is reworked Bull Lake. It was just jumbled up and moved again.
Right.
So, but it doesn't. But in doing that, it strips off some of the depth of weathering, the depth, of, you know, the chemical signatures and stuff like
Yeah.
that. So
Takes the
provides
fines
that.
away.
Yeah, one question that was asked on that, Marge, I know you were on that trip with Cal Roman to Mount Evans, was everybody seemed to want to know, well, where'd all the material go? So I made a half-baked attempt to estimate how big the rock unit was in Glynco, how much was stripped out, and then how much was in the moraine down below. That was somewhat unsuccessful to the extent that this material that I actually, however good or bad the measurement methodology was, it still only came out to be 20% of the stuff that I thought was missing. So where'd the rest of it go? And typically, you know, there's no, if that Kansan and the earlier episodes were extensive, where did all that material go? If the later ones were less extensive. Now, maybe they're all washed all the way down to the plains. Maybe they're just not identifiable because they're that old and have weathered. But it
Well, I
is.
just read an old report from the 50s that talked about collecting Amazonite smoky quartz in the South Flat of Sterling.
Wow. Okay.
So we know it went that far.
Valley fill.
Well, we don't know if glaciers went that far.
No, not the
We know,
glaciers,
we know
but
the creeks. Those could well have been that Yosemite Creek that went across the top of Rampart.
yeah.
And that's what you'd expect. Okay, so at any rate, the next one is North French Creek. These are the west ones. Which would be this one. And again, notice the difference between this valley and this moraine, which in this case it's identified as Pinedale. In that lower left corner, it's on the Glynco, it's identified as Bull Lake. To me, I don't see a lot of difference there. And all three of these we walked pretty extensively. Now, this is right at the tip of the Pinedale one. At the time, I didn't know when we were hiking down there that there is supposedly an exposure of Bull Lake just below and to the left. So that's a hike I need to go on sometime. Although I dragged my kids on several of these, and we took the dog one day, and we actually climbed up North French, which is this, or South French, which is the bottomless pit. So we came across here, up to here, back down thing here, and then out to Bar Camp and down Bar Trail. We got on the shuttle with the dog and my two kids, and the bus driver says, well, it looks like somebody had fun, saying it to the dog. and both of my kids said, yeah, we're glad somebody did. So they'll follow their father almost anywhere, not necessarily willingly, but they were good hikes. This one I want you to see, and you'll have to come up and look a little closer, because I never realized until I actually enlarged this picture. This point is kind of like this one. It's right at the toe, and this drops fairly steep into this area, which is where the trail comes between Bar Camp and Elk Park. But if you look very close, right in this notch, there's a very dark line, and I think it's a difference in the trees more than anything else. But my hunch is that is the extent of the Pinedale Glacier. That's the extent of the Pinedale moraine. And that this stuff down below here is Bull Lake moraine.
And the ages of the Pinedale and the Bull Lake?
Bull Lake is the older, so
Okay, yeah.
130,000 years. Pinedale is 25,000 years is the maximum to the moraine would have been fully developed at about 15 to 18 at the close of that ice age.
Do you see any evidence of the little ice age?
Well, all along I thought this was Little Ice Age.
Yeah.
In that this is such a restricted now. The general thought is that that's actually Pinedale. So no, I don't see any. I'm kind of curious. I've been to several of the glaciers up in the Indian Peaks, and some of those must, I mean, they're still glaciers, so they must have some Little Ice Age signature.
Yeah.
Where,
Rock glaciers and things like that. Do you see any of that?
well, yeah, but rock glaciers are generally post-glacial,
Yeah.
period. Okay, then this one, I talked about these, that's I think important. These are basically Google Earth shots of the southwest side, Bison Reservoir, and then the others. Okay, we'll start with the West Beaver first because that's kind of the way you work around. Now, this one. This is the head end, and you see how gentle this is? This point right here drops straight off here on the other side into Glynco. On the West Beaver, it's gentle all the way down into an area right about in here. And then this is the lower part. This is the dam and the breach. You can see the scar. This moraine, beautiful moraine when you go back there and see it. You can see this arc all the way around. It butts against Trachyte on this side and Cow Mountain on this side, but kind of works its way through. The other thing, yeah, and then this is what we would see. This is the breach when you look at it from Gillette. This is a little broader view. For a long time, I thought they always said this is all Pinedale, and if so, I wondered if this low ridge was actually a front for Bull Lake. But if you look at it in this pit, even from the road, if you look close, this is, I hate to use the word solid, but it's granite. It's a granite. It's kind of greasy, but it's a rock outcrop. It's not a boulder moraine or anything. And if you look at the topo, which I was sort of forced to do putting this thing together, there's a whole series of these ridges that are lined up. I don't know what caused them, but they're definitely there. They're definitely bedrock. They aren't moraine. So it's true that as near as we can tell,
Your 400,000 year of glaciation carving took the tops off of
I don't think so. Maybe, but they aren't lined the way. If you were expecting them to be erosional, like
the bottom of
drumlins or something like that.
the bottom of the valley. The bottom of the glacier carved them off.
Yeah, but it's going the wrong direction. They're perpendicular to the valley.
That's what you
They would
want.
have to be like ridges.
There-
Now maybe there's that possibility, but we'll talk about it when we get there. Okay, then this is the Bomer, and the Bomer is interesting because it's the others have sort of the same and are subparallel. The Bomer just angles off to the south, if you can imagine, and I guess you could use that to say, okay, it's south exposed and it's south facing, and that's why its moraines at 11,000 feet instead of 10,000 feet. That just couldn't go as far. The other strange part of that, though, is if you look here, this is the ridge I say between Madre and Pikes Peak that has been cut down by the headward erosion of the Lake Moraine Glacier, and goes.
And everything that's been cut out is Pikes Peak granite, right?
It's all
Yeah,
Pikes Peak
yeah.
granite. Yeah. There are some parts that are harder and some are softer, but it's
Sure,
all
yeah, oh, absolutely.
pretty
Yeah,
homogeneous
yeah.
in that regard.
Was Pikes Peak fairly uniform as far as the dome goes? Originally, do you think?
I think originally, and that was my map, it had a very steep northeast side and a gentle southwest side. I think those are pre-glacial structural elements of the peak and how it eroded to that final Monadnock shape.
Right.
So yeah. Part of what you see in this one, again, this is the head of you can see all of them. This is the head of West Beaver. This is kind of the head of East Beaver coming down through here. This lake will be important when if we can get up to see it. I want to point that out. And then this shoulder, this is the head of Bomer. And I think this whole area from here to here to here, above there was an ice field that with pike probably sticking out as what's called the Nunatak, which is a Eskimo word for the portion of a mountain that sticks above the ice field.
Okay.
And so if there was an ice field sitting on this shoulder, similar to, if any of you been to Canada, see Columbia ice field or one of those?
Someday.
The ice gets thick enough here that it literally squeezes glaciers down each of those valleys, and then those valleys basically drain the ice away from the glacier at its peak, and then at its end.
I've been to Alaska, but not Canada.
There, you may have seen the same thing there. I don't have that experience except the individual ones that I've seen from the ship on going to Alaska.
There's a Mount Monadnock back in there too.
Mount Monadnock in Maine.
Is it Maine?
Yeah, it's in Maine, and that's kind of the type locality for the remnant of a mountain that remains after a broad area has been leveled down to near base level or peneplain. Okay. So now here's my view on how glaciers started. One thing I want you to, and I'll have to find a good place. If we can't see it here, we can see it on our way to Gillette. But the mountain starts as basically a broad, gentle slope. This again is pre-glacier, post erosion. In other words, this is what the Monadnock looked like. As it got colder, then we started developing this patterned ground. If you walk around on these upper shoulders, you'll see fairly good places of soil and tundra and things, and then they'll be cut by these trains of boulders. I think that concentrated the water so that it then froze and thawed and created very distinct rivulets. And then one of those distinct rivulets that I think is very pre-glacial characteristic is on the north side. I look at it out of my window every day and wonder how the hell did I get there. At any rate, it's this. I've been up and climbed down in it and looked at it, but it's this thing that from Google Earth, it's this thing. This smooth surface is actually this one and this one, and then it's cut by this very V-shaped, steep, non-glaciated but very distinct gash in what is otherwise a very smooth slope. So I think that's started, and from there they'll develop snow in them like this, and then they'll develop ice in them, and then this is actually the I don't know what it's called. I call it Blue Falls, because this valley goes up here and hooks sharply up this way. And I think what happened here is that ice sheet came over to the edge of this ridge, and then when the ice was most extensive, it actually filled down. I don't think this one was here. This is too V-shaped to have been there. It may have directed drainage, but this one, I never noticed that. This may well be a moraine tip there.
Looks like a toad.
Yeah, now I need to get back up there. When I climbed Sentinel Peak, which is right here, I climbed up and then up this rock pile onto this and over here. So this is definitely just a tail slope. But this intrigues me as to how that created. That looks too far away to be just a tail slope,
Shape
and
of
it may be a remnant of a short-lived, if you will, glacier. Would have had to drill out enough the way the Lake Moraine Glacier did, and done that. And that gets us to the next step, which would be a valley like this, which is this is West Beaver. This heads way up here and is very distinct. It has a huge moraine down here. There's no indication of a moraine at the bottom of this. Now you can argue that it's right there where the road comes up through Oil Creek onto Gillette Flat, and it was all eroded away. This, however, looks too V-shaped, so it doesn't look to me like the glacier got down that far. This, however, looks very glacial, this whole headward part. If you've been to Pancake Rock, this is the view you get, is down into this U-shaped bottom, very steep-sided, typically glacial looking thing. So I think this was a glacier that probably didn't operate as long or as extensive as the 7 main ones, but basically what the... Okay, to just beyond milepost 10, there's a pull-off with parking lanes on the right, and that will give us a chance to see what is accepted to be Bull Lake moraine from Glynco Glacier. So we'll look at that. Then from there, I would propose we go up and stop at Glen Cove, and we can look at the Bull Lake Glacier right there at the visitor center. We could also stop and have maybe our lunch at that point as well. And then from there, we'll go up just above Glen Cove is where the exposure of the Pinedale Glacier is, and we can see a little difference there. And then I'm hoping when we go on up on the ridge, we can either walk out to see this coal separation, or if they'll let us go farther up, we'll go to that. Originally, in timing, we could get on a shuttle and go all the way to the surface, all the way to the summit, which would allow us to walk out and actually look down into the crater and see what that looks like.
I've never been up there. I'd love to go up there.
We've
Okay.
paid our dues, we should do that.
We can do that.
Yeah,
We'll see how late,
Yeah, exactly.
and it may be, I still wanted to take everybody to Gillette, which is probably a 45-minute
I
drive
want to do
from
that too.
that. So, yeah, well, as long as we don't run into dark, we're okay.